Reviewing the scientific literature to answer your questions about gender diversity, this is Classroom Psychology. And now here's your host, Dr. Cora Sargent.
Hello everybody and welcome to Classroom Psychology. I'm your host Cora. Thank you so very, very much for joining me. It is wonderful to see you. Wonderful. You get like several syllables in one there. Wonderful to see you. It is wonderful to see you. I'm so glad you're here. Let's talk about gender diversity. Oh my goodness. It seems that battle lines have been drawn as we find ourselves in a very weird world suddenly, with the Supreme Court ruling having happened a few weeks ago and with now all kinds of organizations needing to make a call, right? Because it's very difficult to know, like, you can't really half-ass this thing. Either you include trans women in women's toilets or you exclude trans women from women's toilets. You can't have them half in and half out. So you kind of have to make a choice as an organization. And Scottish Parliament have made the choice to ban transgender women from women's toilets. I'm going to focus on transgender women. It affects trans guys too. But obviously the debate, in inverted commas, the social focus seems to be on trans women, as it often is. So yes, Scottish Parliament banned trans people from the toilets of their gender identity. Thanks, Scottish Parliament. Barclays Bank have done the same thing. And it seems that a bunch of organizations in the UK are also doing the opposite, saying, no, we're going to support trans inclusion. It's extreme. So battle lines are drawn, and we've got this extraordinary support, social support. I have myself received so much warm emails from people. I do teaching on gender diversity. Hey, you want me to come and talk in your school or in your university or in your educational psychology service or in your house? I will come and talk in your house. Then come and find me. I do it for, we have a progressive pricing structure. So if you're a school or something, you have no money, or a university, you have no money, then, come find me. We'll do it for free. We'll do it for free, often trading work. Someone come and talk to our trainees at the University of Southampton in exchange. And we've got some incredible speakers out of arrangements like this. So thanks so much if you're one of them. But so I'll come and talk. But when I have talked to two groups, the overriding experience since the Supreme Court ruling has been one of confusion and concern and uncertainty. And I totally get it, because I feel the exact same way. I know that a school is going to, at some point, they haven't yet, it's only been 3 weeks. They haven't yet, but they are going to, at some point, say, Cora, we've got a transgender young person here, 15 years of age. In what toilet should she pee? We don't want to get sued. And the answer to that question is, I don't know. So maybe don't call me into your school. Maybe don't. My answer is, my answer is, I'm not a lawyer. If you're looking for legal advice, go to the Good Law Project. Extraordinary people there. And they've got some great interpretations of the Equality Act on there, although that was before the Supreme Court ruling, so who knows now. I'm glad I'm not a lawyer, an equalities lawyer in particular, because I have absolutely no idea what to advise people. I mean, I'm no lawyer, right? So I don't know what to advise people, but my guess is that lawyers right now are really unsure because the case law hasn't happened. We just don't know. And until the case law occurs, we don't know where the judiciary is going to lie. Is it going to see the exclusion of trans women as as less than, right? Is it going to see that as discriminatory under the Equality Act? Or is it going to see their inclusion as discriminatory towards biological women? Biological women, amazing. Cisgender women. Is it going to see that? We just don't know. We have no idea. Like before, a couple of weeks ago, I would have said absolutely the inclusion of transgender women is going to be where the Supreme Court is going to lay its hat, because it's always protected our rights. But now I have absolutely no idea. So to schools, what I will now say is, listen, I have no idea how to interpret the law. It's not my job. I'm not got those skills. But I am a psychologist, and I do know the psychological research here, and the psychological research is not at all confused in what happens if you exclude trans people from, the women's toilet. If you treat them as different. If you other them, if you marginalize them, then the outcomes are bad. Minority stress theory applies, right? The outcomes, both physically and psychologically, are super bad. And the research very clearly, extraordinary researchers like Restar, like Lee and Pollitt and Russell, all finding that, just using a name and pronouns that are right for that child or young person that they have chosen can be extraordinarily protective to their mental health. So the research really isn't that confused with, if you're interested in the research, you can listen to the other 42 episodes of this podcast. 42 episodes! I don't know how we got here. I'll be straight with you. 42 episodes. Yeah, you can listen to the other 42 episodes. And, you can see that the research is not at all confused in this regard. So my advice to people, educational psychologists, to schools would be, listen, the psychological outcomes of children and young people who are gender diverse are supported by listening to them, hearing their perspective, believing them, and that's it. And then including them. That's it. Hey, that's it. As for the question of whether you'll get sued, I have no idea. Quite possibly. Probably whatever you do, you're going to get sued. I have no idea. I honestly don't know. And I think we are not going to know until the case law pans out, right? So there's a challenge to the Supreme Court ruling now winging its way to the European Court of Human Rights. But it's going to be a long time before we know what the ruling is going to be, or what the outcomes for the UK from the ruling will going to be. And if reform gets in, who knows even if we're going to be part of the European Convention of Human Rights. So, watch this space. But even before that, people are going to get sued. We're going to see the case law pan out. I have absolutely no idea how to interpret it. But I will say that right now, the trans community is not in a good place as a consequence. Really, really uncertain and concerned. And it's a very strange experience to go to a place and need to look up whether or not I can pee there. Like, where can I pee? I mean, I'm used to that to some degree. Like, I'm a wheelchair user, but I don't use it all the time. I only use it for long distances because multiple sclerosis. But I do use a wheelchair. And so I have to check, if there's a wheelchair accessible toilet there. But now I have to check, does it have a sign up saying trans women can't pee? And I have to find that out without telling anyone I'm trans, right? So it's quite tricky. You just have to, everywhere we go now, every organization is going to have to make the call. Are we included or are we excluded? And all I can say is that if I am excluded, like Scottish Parliament, like Barclays, if any universities follow suit, then all I can say is that the first thing I'm going to do is go and pee in their toilet. Or I'm going to wash my hands. I'm going to absolutely go up there. I'm going to wash my hands. I'm going to break all the rules. Yes, I know that's naughty. And forgive me for my transgressions, everyone. But I follow in a legacy of incredible women who are much braver than me, who didn't do what they were told as their rights were threatened in order to kind of fight for them. And so I aim to misbehave. What can I say? I aim to misbehave. This week, though, much like we do every time we come together, wonderful to see you, we take a confident statement from a public figure, sometimes a politician, sometimes a famous book author. This time, a content creator, Jen, young person creator, designed content for young people, I think. Online, Jen has like 500,000 subscribers on YouTube, and every so often talks about kind of social issues of the day. And this is a super interesting question from Jen. So this is at Jen.
A controversial study conducted by Brown University professor Dr. Lisa Littman asked parents of transgender children a series of questions to measure their level of support and to hear about their child's transitioning process.
I noticed something that was unusual, and I felt that it needed some exploration.
And even though the survey revealed a group of highly open and supportive parents, what they found as the cause was shocking. Findings reveal that 87% of the children experience gender dysphoria, either after being influenced by a friend or after binge watching transition content, or both.
Teenagers, maybe on Reddit, were saying, I have these feelings, I never fit in, I feel lonely, does that mean I'm trans? And the answer is almost always yes. There were also tips and tricks on how to deceive your parents into getting hormones.
So although there are flaws to the study design, such as the data being self-reported, what it potentially shows is the link between social acceptance and the phenomenon of rapid onset gender dysphoria amongst teens.
Thanks so much to Jen for such an interesting question, posed as they often are in the form of confident declaration, a sort of expose of sorts using Lisa Littman's work. Thanks so much. Very interesting question about social media and its influence on trans young people. The first thing to say before we get started is that Lisa Littman's study is not a self-report study. I mean, it kind of is in some regards. I see where he got the idea that it's the self-report of parents, but it's parents talking about the experiences of their adolescent children. So it's not self-report, because when parents say, my child became trans after looking at content online, that's not the adolescent's experience, right? That's not necessarily what happened. That's what a second person perceiving the event from a little bit of distance perceives to have happened. So it's not quite self-report. Not when he says, 87% of kids revealed their trans status after browsing content online, binge watching trans content online. That's the parent's perception. It's not self-report, and it's we have to take it with an enormous pinch of salt, because you really don't know what's happening unless you actually ask young people about their own experience, honestly. But quite aside from that, this is a super interesting question. I really appreciate it. Social media, what is the effect of social media on trans youth, and how do they use it, and what are the impacts of it? Because it's a fast growing field, right? Social media has been, inserted into our lives pretty much constantly. Everybody's using it pretty much, and some people are using it a lot, as we'll come to see from the evidence. But there's a lot of people using social media, and it's evolving very quickly. Short form content has become quite popular quite quickly, from TikTok, which is slightly longer form content, all the way to YouTube Shorts, which is like short form content. And it's super fascinating to know what the influence of this content is on people. And of course, something we need to bear in mind is that the influence of social media on anybody is interesting. I reviewed the literature on social media because I teach on this topic, and I find it really interesting. A summary of what we find is that there are two things going on simultaneously. One is selective self-presentation, where everybody is selecting what they post online. Sometimes it's kind of algorithmically enhanced. Sometimes it's enhanced by AI now. And sometimes, it is the kind of blemish-free version of ourselves, both socially, interpersonally. We show the most, connected, the most socially brilliant, wonderful pictures. We're all having fun. We're all, connected. We're all belong. We all, you know what I mean? And then, of course, visually, we look the part. We look amazing in every photo because they're algorithmically enhanced, and because we don't choose the one that shows us to be not looking as good as we otherwise might, right? So selective self-presentation, and then upward social comparison is the other end of this, where the challenges for people, because social media can have these quite positive effects, and people using it for direct messaging with each other, feeling connected to each other in genuine ways, building genuine relationships, connecting to community is really positive. But when you use it to engage in social comparison, particularly upward social comparison, so you're comparing yourself to people you think are prettier than you, for example, or look better than you, or have better lives than you, then you, in your comparison, comparison is the thief of joy, and upward social comparison online is the thief of mental health. And it really does impact on people's body image, it impacts on people's emotional well-being. It's real bad. And so those two things are in relationship with each other, right? Because in order to feel better about ourselves, we post the selected content that makes us feel good about ourselves again, and we get, social likes online and engagement with people online, so they make us feel like we're okay, but it's selectively self-presented, and then other people viewing that content engage in the upward social comparison toward you in your idealized version that you've posted online. And we get into this kind of nightmare cycle where everybody feels bad and everybody's posting selectively. What else can you do? Except for there are some things that we can do to help with that. Things like posting more honestly. Not that long ago, there was an Instagram versus reality trend that research has highlighted as being positive for people's body image, where people post their un-Instagrammed shots, their non-algorithmically enhanced, non-AI enhanced, non-photoshopped kind of shots of themselves, to be genuine and honest online. Like Pamela Anderson's a really good example of somebody who does this really beautifully well. She deliberately goes to events without makeup. She deliberately goes to events as her genuine self to kind of demonstrate to people that, there is beauty in honesty, in genuineness. And I respect that a great deal. So when it comes to social media use for young people generally, there are positive and negative effects, particularly negative when we start to talk about upward social comparison. Now, we need to hold that in mind because we are going to find that for the trans community, it's not wildly dissimilar, but it has unique effects because, of course, they're not comparing themselves generally to people around them. They're comparing themselves to other idealized trans people, or they're comparing themselves to people of the gender with which they identify in their idealized self. And so the upward social comparison can be quite difficult to tolerate for the trans community. I think that's where we're going to land. But we start with Herman and colleagues, 2024, social media use and experiences among transgender and gender diverse adolescents in the International Journal of Transgender Health, the biggest journal in our field. Incredible journal. We've published there once. It was a good day. So these guys brought together children aged 5 to 10 years and adolescents aged 11 years and older who'd all been referred to the Hamburg Gender Identity Service from January 2020 to December 2021. That's 263 families. And this is kind of interesting. So what they did is they asked people about social media use, basically. And they found that transgender, gender diverse adolescents used the internet and social media mostly for entertainment. So most of them, about 90% of them, were using it for listening to music or making music primarily. 89% were using it for watching movies or series, like on YouTube and Netflix. And 87% used it for communicating or socializing, including talking to friends. So that's 87%. So, quite a lot of young people using it for the same kind of reasons that cisgender adolescents used it for. In terms of amounts, we can do some cool stuff because there's been some bigger studies on the general population in Germany. So it's more directly comparable to the Hamburg sample. And we find that their time on the internet, the transgender and gender diverse adolescents' time on the internet, was comparable, very comparable to the German general population, about 4.16 hours versus 4.02 hours daily use, which is a lot, right? 4 hours a day. But I guess, hey, I'm 42 years old. I use it quite a bit, but I don't know if I use it for 4 hours a day. And they tend to spend a little bit less time on social media than the typical cisgender German population, 2.84 hours versus 3.22 hours daily. So transgender and gender diverse young people using it slightly less for social media, but honestly, very, very comparable, right? Now, one of the things that the gender diverse population use it for, at least in Hamburg, quite separate from from the social media and watching videos that everybody else is doing, watching music videos. Turns out most of the time they're watching music videos. I had no idea, which is super cool. Music videos was like the most frequent use of YouTube and Netflix. But anyway, these folk were also using the internet for identity-specific activities. So gender diverse youth, of course, different to cisgender youth, use it to browse transgender related topics, 40% of them, and 22% use it for experimenting or expressing their identity. So experimenting with or expressing their identity, and 15% use it for specifically LGBTQ platforms. So it is true to say, I think, that trans and gender diverse adolescents, and it's the same as the wider literature too that I'm reading, they don't use it radically different amounts to cisgender populations as far as I can tell, or in radically different ways, with the exception of the identity-specific stuff, which is obviously unique to them. Browsing transgender-related topics, experimenting with and expressing their identity, using specific LGBTQ platforms, obviously that's specific to them. Now, obviously, there's quite a kind of diversity in how much people use it and what they use it for. It's not a universal experience. And interestingly, the research seems quite confused. Like it gives quite a confusing picture about what makes people use it more or less. So McInroy and colleagues in 2019, LGBT youth community engagement and resource seeking online versus offline, in the Journal of Technology and Human Services. Super interesting. 4,009 participants in a survey. They asked things like, are you active as an LGBTQ person in your online LGBTQ plus community? Do you feel supported in that community online? And do you feel safe in that community online? So they brought together 2,454 people who answered those specific questions, who were like active in the LGBTQ online space. And fascinatingly, they found that young people were a little younger when they started participating in online LGBTQ communities compared to when they started to engage in offline LGBTQ communities. So young people were 15 years of age when they first participated online on average, with a range of like 7 to 29 years of age. And they found, here's the sort of highlight note, they found that most people were spending at least 2 hours online per day. 90% of participants were spending at least 2 hours online per day. And they found that people who spent more time online on a daily basis were more active, felt more supported, and felt safer online than those who spent less time online. So using these communities more made them feel more supported, more safer, and more active online. Super interesting. Now, it's not universally the case, though. So Vogel and colleagues in 2021, problematic social media use in sexual and gender minority young adults, and Herman and colleagues 2024, how social is social media for transgender and gender diverse youth. Now, these two, the first is 302 sexually and gender minority young adults, and the second is children and adolescents who attended the Hamburg Gender Identity Service. Now, these two both find quite the opposite, that people using social media too much, the first one talks about problematic social media use, though it's quite difficult to know what problematic social media use is. I think in their study, they talk about problematic social media use being about how it influences you in your life, not about the amount specifically that you're using it. You're like, are you thinking about it when you're not on it? Are you planning what to post when you're not on it? How much is it influencing your life outside of being on it? So people who with problematic social media use were still only using it 2.5 hours per day on average. That, which is not wildly dissimilar from the average generally. But the problematic use is more about what it makes you feel. And people with more problematic use had greater internalized stigma, which we talked about in a couple of episodes ago, greater depressive symptoms, and lower perceived emotional support. And in Herman's study, they found that connecting to the peers of the LGBTQ community does help people to feel better, less alone. However, in their research, they find that people who did feel more alone used social media more frequently. So they found that the use of online support networks in their study, children and young people, 415 families in Hamburg, they found that using online support networks was, in their study, associated with it reporting more internalizing problems. Now, I think the way that I understand, because we got some pretty discriminating results, right? Like contradictory results between McEnroy's study and Vogel's and Herman's. And I think they are not actually as contradictory as they appear. That McEnroy finds that social media use improves people feeling supported. It improves people feeling safer online, but that people who report problematic social media use have greater stigma, depressive symptoms, and lower perceived emotional support. And people with social media use who use it for online support networks report more internalizing problems. I think what this evidence is that people seek support online if they are experiencing internalized stigma, depressive symptoms, more internalizing problems, and that the experience online can be supportive, can make them feel safer, can make them feel more connected. So you can see in this situation how online spaces might become a refuge for young people, because it's if they're experiencing like all of these kind of internalizing problems and then they seek refuge online and feel more supported, then being online can become one of the only places where they feel safe, would be my guess. So let's look at what they post then when they're there. Maybe this will give us more of a sense of what's going on. Paciente and colleagues in 2025, #TransTalk, a digital ethnographic study using content analysis to investigate transgender and gender diverse For You page content on TikTok that may affect mental health. In the International Journal of Transgender Health. You gotta love it. I love that journal so much. And you can see why this study got published there. It's honestly one of the coolest studies I've seen in a long time. So they used TikTok videos. They collected 150 videos in the study that together had 55.5 million views, 9 million likes, 111,000 comments, a bunch of bookmarks and shares. So these are highly engaged with pieces of content on TikTok, right? Short form videos. And they looked at who were the people in the videos, like presenting or performing in the videos, and what you would describe it as creating the content, basically. Gosh, I aged myself dramatically in that statement. And who are they? What's their gender identity? And what was the content of their content? And super interesting. So they basically did content analysis, and I've got some very cool examples here. The age group most frequently was young adults between 18 and 25 years of this content, although there was some content between 13 and 17 years of age, and a little bit of content for children under 13 years of age, created by children under 13, and a bunch created by adults. It's about 65%, just shy of 65% of the content was created by and for young adults, 18 to 25 years. Now, gender identity, about half of it, 39% was trans men, 38% was trans women, and about 12% was non-binary, 3% gender fluid, and about 5% gender queer, 2%, 1.3% agender, and 1% was two-spirit. And they found really interestingly that what people were posting on TikTok was vast majority of it was about creating a safe space through community connection in one way or another, either through the affirmation of identity or through providing informational support to gender diverse young people. Very cool. They also found that people engaged in discourse through TikTok. They were defriending trans experiences and challenging transphobia in the majority of cases when they did that. And they were also recounting experiences of social adversity. So recounting distal stresses, which is social adversity outside of the self, and in some cases proximal stresses, recounting the experience of sort of internalized stigma and the prediction of the anticipation of distress and discrimination and the challenges that poses. So the vast majority of people were using TikTok to create community, essentially. And some of the actual content quotes are really interesting. So I'm going to read some to you. I also included this non-exhaustive list of trans podcasts, says the content creator, because for some reason it's so affirming to listen to other trans people just talk about their lives. At least it is to me. And some of these podcasts quite literally saved my life when I was just starting my transition. This was followed up by a comment from a user. Your transition is inspiring, especially to me who also transitioned late, in inverted commas. Thank you for being the representation I needed. Beautiful example, right, of creating community. Another one. Another comment on another video. I'm sorry your parents don't understand you. You deserve better. You are loved, and I am proud of you for everything you've achieved so far. This is, I might cry. Listen, I might cry. That's absolutely gorgeous, right? It's about not just the content creators, but the comments themselves are about building and participating in affirming communities. It's really beautiful. What's important to understand is this, the content creator points to herself, this is not playing pretend. This is about having the internal align with the external. I don't know why this happened, but I could not go another day in a male body, so I chose to live. I'm just here trying to live my life and offer insight to what this process is for those that want that information. Another content creator. There was a man who smacked my behind while I was at work one day, and then when I confronted him about it, he then starts yelling at me and screaming at me and saying all sorts of horrible things. He insulted me and then called me a man after sexually harassing me. It's a good example of, exploring the experiences of marginalization and distal stresses that follow. And another one. I remember in 2017, I convinced myself that I could fight the feelings of gender dysphoria by putting on weight and becoming muscular. I would eat 6,000 calories every single day. I'd go to the gym 6 to 7 times a week. And as I was beginning to achieve the physique that I thought I wanted, I realized that I still wasn't happy. From then on, I began to explore my femininity and my gender identity. Started experimenting with my pronouns and makeup and clothing, and I found so much euphoria in that. But shortly after, I realized that I still didn't feel complete. For years, I've been acutely aware of the fact that I was a trans woman, and after 30 years of living my life in a body that I was never comfortable and happy with, and never felt aligned with, I took my body into my own hands. I accepted myself and came out publicly. I followed my intuition without trying to make concessions about who I was and who I wanted to be. For the first time in my life since the age of 22, I'm starting to feel complete. And this time, it's not going away. I find this incredibly moving. This is trans TikTok, right? This is trans TikTok. This is what is created online. What people are posting about is, in the majority of cases, about building affirming, supportive, inclusive communities online. And the comments reflect exactly that. People participating in and supporting each other in community online. Absolutely stunning. So TikTok, for some, I don't know what I'm trying to say. Listen, TikTok, yes, I agree that TikTok content is quite trans affirming and supportive on the whole. It's a wonderful thing. I don't think we should feel bad about that, actually. So what's the effect then, given that, people can feel really internalized stigma that makes them need to seek online content, and then people can feel supported by that online content, and people are posting, huge amounts, 55 million views of these videos, huge amounts of content online, only 150 videos reviewed in that study, and the vast majority of them were supportive, affirming community building experiences. So what's the effect of people viewing this stuff? Well, Berger and colleagues, and then Aldridge and colleagues we need to talk about. Berger and colleagues in 2022, Social Media Use and Health and Wellbeing of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender and Queer Youth, a systematic review. So, if you've been here before, we love a good systematic review. This reviewed all the studies they could possibly find that included at least 50% of people in the sample to be aged 10 to 24 years, needed to be specific to LGBTQ populations or present LGBTQ findings, included all studies that used social media use as a predictor in the study, explored connecting with peers, identity development or social support, and need to be published from 2012 onwards. Incredible piece of work. It's a massive systematic review. We'll not go into it in too much detail because we could literally spend a whole episode here. It's absolutely stunning. But with a systematic review of all the studies they could find that looked at the outcomes of social media use for LGBTQ people. So this isn't just gender diverse people. This is LGBTQ people, and specifically LGBTQ youths, or especially LGBTQ youths. They found that social media use showed a reduction. So young people who used social media showed a reduction in mental health symptoms, including anxiety, depression, and paranoia. In the research looking at narratives, they found that people engaging in social media showed decreased feelings of isolation, described decreased feelings of isolation and increased well-being. They found that social media was a significant source of social support for LGBTQ youths. It was also a space where young people could control the expression of their sexual and gender identities. Again, kind of experimenting with their expression, testing it out, leaving breadcrumbs and testing the water with a supportive community, and that they experienced from these communities reduced exposure to stigma and discrimination from their expressions. It's amazing, like alleviating stresses among LGBTQ youths, say the authors, is associated with a reduced risk of poor mental health, including depression and suicidal ideation. Other literature has found that developing social networks and expressing LGBTQ identity safely without stigma or discrimination leads to reduced mental health problems, including anxiety, depression, addictive behaviors, and suicidal ideation. So social media is a real lifeline to LGBTQ people. Creating and participating in supportive, affirming communities is actually really valuable. Now, Aldridge in 2024, I want to focus on this study very specifically because it got published after Berger's study, so it wasn't included in their systematic review. But more than that, Aldridge is focused on UK social media users. In fact, 54 responses to their survey, average age of 35.29 years, but respondents ranged from 18 to 72 years, which is super cool, quite a broad sample. And they asked people about their experiences. And here are some direct quotes. Stunning. I absolutely love this stuff. And one of the reasons that, direct quotation is so valuable here, this kind of study, qual research is so valuable, is because, we're not going to hit this with a broad brush, right? The actual experience, when we're talking about like both negative and positive experiences, the kind of that it can be a refuge, but it can be a negative experience too. There's nuance that we need to consider. So this is a 22-year-old non-binary young person in the UK. Social media exposes me to a lot more transphobic hatred, which can be really scary. It can also be really informative and help me to connect with people like me, so I found it to be a double-edged sword. From a young 23-year-old non-binary person, I found so much community, support and love online, and have carved out my own little corner of the internet for my friends and I to exist freely. A 27-year-old non-binary person, I think engaging with people with a diverse identities online was an important factor in my own gender journey. You have to see something before you can believe it's possible, and seeing people using she, they pronouns or identifying with gender in ways I didn't think were possible or allowed has helped me to accept and express myself more authentically, both on and offline. A 40-year-old non-binary person, it has made me more comfortable and confident in accepting my gender identity, at least within myself. In a world with limited Black and brown, bisexual and non-binary representation, where marginalized people are often told what their identity is, it has taken a long time to understand myself. And an age 31-year-old woman. I don't know where else I could find health information. Doctors often have no idea. Getting into contact with docs at a gender clinic is nigh impossible. Social media gives us a place to network and learn what works for us. An age 43-year-old man and trans man. Every single report comes back with the same response, where Facebook claims their so-called community standards have not been breached. The comments I report usually involve accusations of grooming, paedophilia, and child abuse. There is also an increasing number of comments challenging LGBTQIA people to complete suicide, but with subtle changes in language so Facebook doesn't see an issue with it. For example, why don't you become one of the 41% in a reference to suicide rates among trans people? An age 31-year-old woman. When engaging more with the trans community, it can be incredible to see us doing amazing things and living our lives. But it also means closer contact to those who are actively detrimental to our community. I try to watch, learn, and listen and speak up when I can, but it's draining to keep up for long. It's impossible to be online and not see the hate we get. But I found I can at least maintain a balance where I don't actively have it aimed at me unless I engage. So it's interesting. These are kind of UK people talking about both the sort of positives and negative aspects of social media use, while it gives them connection to community and helps them to feel more supported and affirmed, and identifying what Laverne Cox would call possibility models. They also get exposed to the discrimination that is inherent with being online and gender diverse. Now, Berger and colleagues, Social Media Use and Health and Wellbeing of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender and Queer Youth, a systematic review, published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research. Didn't even know that was a journal. That's cool. They identified specifically there are negative outcomes of social media use as well. So they found that heavy social media use among LGBTQ youths is associated with increased feelings of loneliness and sensitivity. You can see how challenging this can be to make any sense of, right? 5 seconds ago, we just identified the positive effects of social media use. And here we have a systematic review looking at the converse. There are also quite negative effects connected. So social media, but I think what we have to bear in mind is that it's not just about social media use, it's about how you use it and how much. So here we have heavy social media use associated with increased feelings of loneliness and sensitivity, and that social media dependency is also linked to poor academic performance, sleep deprivation, and mental health conditions. So while social media, they say, could limit discrimination and stigma, LGBTQ youths are also still at a higher risk of experiencing web-based discrimination. So bearing in mind, of course, that this is Berger and colleagues, the same systematic review we looked at earlier. Lick is looking at negative outcomes, but earlier we looked at their review of the positive findings. And so because it's the same systematic review, they're able to kind of rationalize these two ends of the spectrum. They say that this review highlights both the positive and negative aspects of social media use among LGBTQ youths. They talk about different platforms offering different possibilities, with some platforms being more welcoming of gender diverse identities, including non-binary identities, but some outing people by them selecting those identities to the wider public and putting them at risk of discrimination. They talk about the distinction between using social media to find and forge positive community and heavy social media use or negative social media use, where they get exposed to the kind of discrimination and marginalization online, or where they start using social media in negative ways or to an extent that has a negative impact on their life. So social media really is a double-edged sword, and Fisher and colleagues 2024 Social Media Double-Edged Sword, literally the title. I swear to you, I didn't know that this was the title of the study before I just literally read it. Social media, a double-edged sword for LGBTQ plus youth, computers and human behavior. For sure, they describe this cool study. It's a cool study. My goodness, I can't believe they described it as a double-edged sword. For sure, they got young people into this study, somewhere in the region of about 300 and something young people, 406, just over 400 young people, the majority of whom were 14 to 18. They were all 14 to 18 years of age, but most of them were 16. And they were all like cisgender lesbian boys, cisgender gay boys, cisgender bisexual youth, and transgender and gender non-binary youth. And they had a couple of questioning youth in there as well. The majority were non-Hispanic white, 44%, but 30% were black and 9% Hispanic and 15% other. So quite a diverse sample. And they talk about, like, this is where it gets really interesting. In their review here, as they bring together these diverse voices in their use of social media across the LGBTQ spectrum, they find that social media can be a source of connection, of refuge, and of rejection. A couple of direct quotes. It has been really nice for me to be on social media because it's helped me learn more about my LGBTQ plus identity. And I've been able to surround myself with people who are like me and accept me. It can also be depressing and defeating to see all of the hate, especially because my specific identities are very hated even in the community. It can be isolating to feel like you're unwanted in the one community that's supposed to accept you. So these authors, and that quote kind of describes the beautiful, what they describe as a love-hate relationship, that sort of double-edged sword in some of the narratives they looked at that described a sort of balance that LGBTQ plus youth needed to navigate in trying to gain the benefits of their sort of online LGBTQ plus communities, these communities of affirmation and support and community, while simultaneously bracing for the hostility and seeking refuge in those communities from a hostile world. So it's really tricky. So they described how people who described social media as primarily a source of rejection and isolation for them, as reporting higher levels of mental health difficulties and substance use symptoms. So they found that people who could curate their social media feeds and participation to make them sources of connection and refuge fared better than those who experienced even vicarious discrimination and rejection, right? So we need, I think, primarily to make sure that social media spaces are not going to tolerate the kind of vicarious discrimination and personal discrimination that these narratives caught in these spaces. Now, you got to bear in mind that a lot of social media platforms have softened their anti-discrimination policies, right? So we got a situation here of a perfect storm. On the one hand, a double-edged sword of social media use where young people and people generally are searching for community, trying to provide community that's affirming and supportive on platforms that do feature in a lot of hate and negative comments and personal and vicarious discrimination, and that don't challenge people or prevent people from doing it, which is a bit of a problem, like a huge problem potentially. Now, the other aspect of this, of course, which that quote kind of spoke to, is marginalization within the community itself, especially for people with intersectional kind of marginalized identities. Selke and colleagues in 2020, transgender adolescents' uses of social media for social support, brought together a bunch of trans adolescents aged 15 to 18 in the Midwestern US, and interviewed them about their social media experiences. And a couple of these experiences I found very interesting because they spoke directly to this issue. Now, particularly, I think for gender variant, non-binary, gender fluid, and I imagine people of color, disabled people with sort of intersecting marginalized identities, where it, one of these, you search for community, and within that community, you might experience marginalization. So here's a quote that I think describes that experience quite well. There's a lot of gatekeeping. So this is a young person, Midwestern United States, right? Especially with young people who are gender non-conforming or gender variant. It's like, yeah, you're trans, but you're not trans enough for this community to accept you. So we're not going to do that. Or there's not a lot of praise for people who don't use medication or who choose not to transition at all. Just like you, yeah, you might be trans, but you're not trans enough. It's kind of gorgeous and a bit like saddening to hear that, right? That, there is the opportunity for people within communities to feel marginalized even by those communities because of their intersecting identities or because of their own kind of like more rare gender diverse identities. So if there's one thing I think we need to remember as people using social media, it's to make our communities as inclusive as they can be and to not marginalized people for their experiences. We're all marginalized people. We know what it's like. So one of the things that we can do right away is to make sure that our communities are as inclusive of like marginalized people as they can be, right? That's what we're here to do. Now, one of the things that people might suggest is that, hey, if social media experiences are negative, then why don't people use it less, right? Should that be something we encourage people to do? Take a break from social media. Coyne and colleagues in 2023 analysis of social media use, mental health and gender identity among US youths in JAMA Network Open. They talk about some very interesting features of gender diverse folk taking breaks, very specifically. So this is a direct quote from a young person. Real life, they say, isn't safe for LGBTQ people, but online there is more control where I can find people who have similar beliefs. I think that is something we have to hold in mind, because what they find is that taking intentional technology breaks was significantly associated with increases in depression and emotional problems for transgender and non-binary youths, and not for cisgender youths. So, and this is the refuge argument, right? This is what we talked about so far, is that for some transgender and non-binary people, gender diverse folk, the internet, these communities are a refuge. So taking a break while for gender diverse youth, while for cisgender youth doesn't have this negative effect, it might have a bit of a negative effect for gender diverse youth because it takes away their safe place. One transgender non-binary advisory board adolescent in the study explained this. I'm fine taking breaks because I already have a support group that is super nice to me. For others, when they delete it, they delete their safe place. That's why they feel bad. They don't have that community anymore. So I think we have to be quite careful about inviting gender diverse folk to take breaks from social media, especially if social media is for them something of a refuge. So connected to this point about marginalization then within the community, people not feeling that they're trans enough to belong, for example, Herman and colleagues, 2024, this is a study we've referred to already, social media use and experiences among transgender and gender diverse adolescents. In their study, they cite this kind of interesting point that personal experience videos online on things like YouTube, the sort of the supportive community building content that people can access, while they might serve as a valuable resource for young transgender and gender diverse individuals, they can also reproduce transnormative narratives, suggesting that there is just one right way of being transgender and gender diverse, right? So this is particularly problematic for non-binary folk who might feel like their experiences are not reflected or representative or welcome. And also it's problematic if the narratives that are online are selectively self-presented in some way, right? So the narratives that get exposed on TikTok, on YouTube, that people can access are the narratives of successful, in inverted commas, transition stories with quick or positive results that can create or reinforce unrealistic expectations towards desired treatment outcomes. Now, I've had this recently. I saw a trans woman who has gone, I mean, she's a great content creator. I love watching her content generally, but she has just gone through voice surgery and her voice sounds incredible. And you know, I'm very sensitive to voice myself. I'm doing voice training. Next episode is going to be on voice. Gonna love it. We'll talk more about it. But she had surgery and she documented on TikTok her sort of recovery from surgery and then when she first used her voice. And it's gorgeous. In fact, let me find it for you. This is Belle Priestley talking about, well, since feminization surgery, voice feminization surgery. God, I love this so much.
Today we're trying to do a deep voice for the first time after having voice feminization surgery. So I had vocal feminization surgery about 4 months ago, nearly. I haven't done like a boy voice, deep voice, because I'm scared that I'm going to ruin it and not be able to go back, which is not the case, I don't think. I need to like go down.
Yo, 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 yo. Hello, how are you? Yeah, I'm good.
I just don't think it has the same effect anymore. Sorry, I don't really have a party trick anymore. What do I do?
Thanks to Belle Priestley. I freaking love that. video. Amazing that she's having such a good outcome from her surgery. So I watched that TikTok, as did some millions of people. And when I watched it, I was like, oh, you know, her experience is incredible. Like, maybe I should get voice therapy. Maybe I should get voice surgery. You know, maybe I could do this. But I don't know that the outcomes of voice surgery are frequently that positive, honestly. I'm not actually sure what the outcomes of voice surgery are. We'll talk about it in the next episode. We talk about voice. I have no idea, but I can understand the sort of the pull from what Herman is talking about, this kind of pull of successful transition stories with apparently positive results that can create or reinforce potentially unrealistic expectations towards desired treatment outcomes for young people, right? And she's, you know, bearing in mind, she's also absolutely stunning. And this isn't just about Belle. So sorry. Listen, you know, but this is about kind of the voices that get amplified online, right? They're often particularly beautiful, or, you know, very attractive. They're often, you know, they're just extremely fortunate, right? They have these extraordinary treatment outcomes, and that can contribute to problems. Now, it contributes to problems, and Verman in 2025, this year, media pressure and body satisfaction in transgender and gender diverse adolescents, a cross-sectional mediation analysis in the International Journal of Transgender Health, the biggest journal in our field worldwide. I freaking love it. So this is a good study. And what they find is looking at 188 transgender and gender diverse adolescents from 11 to 18 years with a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. They looked at the relationship between media pressure from their kind of social media experiences and body satisfaction, like satisfaction in one's own physical appearance and one's own body. And they looked, because as we have already described right at the start of the episode, for most people, for cisgender people, there is a relationship between social media use, upward social comparison, and body satisfaction, but it is through thin ideal idealization or muscular ideal internalization, right? This idealization, the internalization of thin or muscular ideals, depending on the kind of body that you desire, right? So for young women, they see bodies online that are very thin, they internalize that thin ideal and that upward social comparison of people online, even if those people have presented themselves quite selectively or have kind of changed their images to make themselves look more attractive, even without meaning to. You know, some of these apps these days, as I, you know, shake my stick at people on my porch, you know, some of these apps do it without even your consent. Will just, you know, smarten up your appearance. I'm on Zoom a lot of the time, and Zoom does that to your appearance without even asking. I mean, I said yes when it did ask me. It asked me, but, you know, I'm not going to say no. So I have this kind of slight weird experience where I see myself on Zoom and I'm like, wow, you look great. And then I see myself in the mirror and I'm like, wow, you look tired. Like, you know, so the upward social comparison for like guys in the world, seeing the muscular ideal, internalizing it from online sources, like particularly social media, and then comparing those to themselves results in poorer body satisfaction. For young girls, it's often a thin ideal internalization that then impacts body satisfaction. So these authors looked at what happened for gender diverse youth, particularly for like those assigned female at birth. By happenstance, I think 188 transgender and gender diverse adolescents, 84% of them were assigned female at birth, 16% were assigned male at birth, all had a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. What did they find? They found that there was an impact of media pressure on body satisfaction, but it wasn't significant as mediated through muscular ideal or thin ideal. So media pressure did influence the muscular ideal internalization. It did influence thin ideal internalization for the trans community, but for the trans community, that doesn't influence their body satisfaction in the same way as the cis community, at least not in this study. Bearing in mind, this is right at the cutting edge of research, right? Published just this year. What they did find was that appearance comparison mediated the relationship significantly. So people viewing perfect forms of people online, their appearance being sort of more selectively self-presented, maybe even buffed to a polish, they see those, they compare themselves to that appearance, and that influences their body satisfaction. The authors say, consistent with our hypothesis, higher appearance comparison was significantly associated with body satisfaction, but unexpectedly, body ideal internalization was not. Whereas cisgender adolescents may experience body dissatisfaction due to internalized beauty standards, transgender and gender diverse adolescents may prioritize aligning their physical appearance with their gender identity over meeting these conventional ideals. So developing feminine features for trans girls is more important to them than adhering to thin ideals. And here is where we land, that for the transgender and gender diverse community, we have to be quite careful of the representations that we post online. I think the research highlights that what the trans and gender diverse community might need are realistic representations of our journeys online. The self-selected presentation combined with social media algorithms amplifying the voices of people who have ideal outcomes following transition, particularly aesthetically, that creates an unrealistic standard for trans people to follow. And when our own transitions don't quite meet those expectations, we can feel very dissatisfied with our bodies and our appearance. So what we need is realistic expectations, and we need realistic representations, and we need a sort of Instagram versus reality for the transgender and gender diverse community, creating representations that are realistic, giving us, a wonderful possibility model, as Laverne Cox would say, a model of possibility that is realistic and positive, where we can find an appearance for ourselves, we can find an embodiment in the world, a representation of the embodiment we might one day have for ourselves that is realistic and nonetheless valid. In answer to our question from Jen about social media, I think overall what the research suggests is that, trans people use social media just like everyone else. Trans and gender diverse young people don't seem to use it any more than other people, and they do use it for the same reasons as everyone else does, although they also use it for some unique reasons around their own identities. But the majority of social media and the representations we see here in the literature suggest that social media can be a space of refuge, a space where we come together, build community, and find a way to find each other, to find possibility models, to find opportunities to see what it is possible for us to be in the world. And that can be a beautiful, beautiful thing. We need to make sure that these communities are as inclusive as they can be, that they don't accidentally marginalize people that are different to us, even if they're also gender diverse. They're just gender diverse in a slightly different way, recognizing that gender is a beautiful tapestry and all are welcome. Create inclusive, fully inclusive environments. And then we also need to make sure that these communities are fully representative of the wider community, that we don't accidentally fall into the habit of just showing very idealized stories and outcomes, because we need to show real people, genuine experiences, so that the possibility models that young people have are realistic and nonetheless accepted in the world, welcome, so that we can create a world where literally everyone in their wonderful and beautiful diversity can find a place to belong. Thanks so very, very much for joining me. It's wonderful to see you as always. I hope you are doing well. And hey, next time we're going to talk about voice, and I'm going to talk about my own voice training. We're going to review, because I've recorded every single day that I have been doing voice training. I've recorded myself. So we're going to be able to see pre and post. We're going to be able to see before and after. We're going to be able to see the real outcomes of voice training. And wow, has it been a journey? Thanks so very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you, and I hope you look forward to hearing me in the next one.